I'm going to be talking about a visit I did to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., USA. And this was just about a month ago. And so I'll explain to you what I saw there. So this is the museum in the background there. And this is right in D.C., in what they call the National Mall, where they have the U.S. Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, even the White House is in the vicinity. So this is it. Now, the mall is set up in 3 galleries. The first one is on slavery and freedom. Second one and the third one you can read there. Most of what I'll show you today is from the first gallery, just to give us an idea of what was going on. And that period that is covered there, you'll notice they say from the 15th to the 21st century. So think 1400s to the late 2000s. I mean, to the early 2000s, sorry. 1400s to the early 2000s, whatever happened. So slavery and freedom, 1400 to 1877. I just thought to capture this quote here, and I'll read it to you. It says, "We've got to tell the unvarnished truth. We've got to tell the unvarnished truth." When I saw this map on the right here, I could recognize it because I've seen this map in my research during this awakening. And it shows the African states during the 1400s to like the 1700s. And, you know, if you haven't seen this map, there's a lot of good stuff to look for it. You can go to sites like raremaps.com. You'll see things like the Atlantic Ocean was called the Ethiopian Ocean. A large chunk of Africa was called Ethiopia. So that will change your context when you're reading the scriptures. This next slide, I'll introduce it by reading the scripture at the top from Deuteronomy. One of the curses says, "The stranger that is within ye shall get up above you very high, and you shall come down very low. He, the stranger, shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail." So basically, the slave masters, the colonialists, would come to our land and they would be above us. Here we have some documentation about Africa and an emerging global economy, the world in 1400. All right, I'll just read these bullet points, not the whole thing. But as of around 1400, this was the picture. Slavery was everywhere. Okay, the trade in gold, salt, and spices far exceeded the trade in slaves. So people were doing business or commerce using whatever goods and products are listed here and others. Most of these actually are from the continent, gold, salt, and spices. But slavery was not a big deal. It was, you know, few pockets here and there. Slavery was not based on perceptions of race. Slavery was a temporary status. Now, on this page, we begin to see Europe and an emerging global economy. And this is after 1400s. Look at what has changed. Slavery became based on perception of race. So we had Europeans predominantly enslaving other people. We also had Arabs enslaving people. The enslaved people were considered property and dehumanized. Slavery was an inherited status and passed down through the generations, and slavery was for life. There's a scripture here that says, "The fruit of thy land and all the labors shall a nation which you know not eat up, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed always." So the fruit of this land, the gold, the salt, the spices, our forefathers, when they messed up, when they didn't keep the commandments, they did not eat those fruits of their land. This was eaten up by their colonial masters. Let's take a look at the next slide here.
No offense, but if you still think stocks, real estate, or
somebody needs to mute. Okay. All right. So Deuteronomy 28:48. Therefore shall you serve your enemies, which the Lord shall send against you, in hunger and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. He shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he have destroyed you. We just saw a similar image when Mama Margaret was talking about what they saw in Angola. These are similar images in the museums here in America. Yokes upon them. This scripture, I am yet to see anybody else other than the people depicted here who experienced being enslaved like this. It's only people of African descent, the Israelites, as spoken of here, who have experienced this. The Bantu. So in hunger, now they don't have their food in their homelands. They're being transported and they don't have as much food as they had. In thirst, don't have enough to drink. Nakedness, even the picture itself depicts it. But this means you're poor because you don't have food, drink, or clothes. Around the world, it is a fact that people of African descent experience the most poverty of other people groups. This is part of that curse that the people of Israel are experiencing. And again, I'll say, I don't know of any other people group other than people of African descent who have experienced slavery to where they have yokes of iron upon their necks. Whether you talk of today's diaspora in North America, the Caribbean islands, Brazil, or in India, they all experience this. All right, this is an example of a gentleman. His name is Mahoma Bakwakwa. He was born in Benin and sold into slavery in Brazil. Bakwakwa was ultimately brought to New York, where he escaped to freedom. His story touches on a cross-section of experiences of enslaved and free Africans in America, from religious conversion, just like we saw what Mama Margaret was talking about, moving to Haiti, being educated in Boston, and finally settling in Canada. Bakwakwa later recorded his life story documenting the horrors of slavery. So let's talk about this slavery. First of all, the museum indicates it was a global trade. And then here it talks about the ships that were used in this global trade. What does it say about these ships? Slave ships were draped with flags of their countries and with banners of the merchant companies that held monopolies to trade in human capital. It was common for at least 30 slave ships to sit at anchor off the same part of the coast of Western Africa. So imagine 30 ships chilling at the harbor in Angola, okay? And they have the flags of their companies or the flags of their countries on them. And they are waiting human cargo to be transported from shore and stored in the hull, just like we saw when they were going into the boat. They were being told to go downstairs. After several stops along the coast, ships with hulls packed to capacity were ready to set sail across the Atlantic. Okay? The scriptures in Deuteronomy 28. The Most High shall cause thee to be smitten before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. This says it's a global trade. Global means to all parts of the earth. This is what was happening. Deuteronomy 28:64. And the Lord shall scatter you among all people. Only people of African descent have been scattered amongst all people globally, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, even wood and stone. You know, when Mama Margaret talked about the people who are being forced to convert or believe in Jesus or something like that, we saw an image of a crucifix or a cross. I don't know if it was made of wood and stone, but I bet it was probably one of those. Today, most of Saharan Africa worships Islam, or the adherents of Islam. The Muslims have what they call the Kabbalah stone. When they go to Mecca on pilgrimage, they perform some rites to a stone. That is the Sahara, top part of Africa, mostly Muslim. Sub-Sahara is largely Christian and a few other religions. And like we have seen in the images Mama Margaret presented, and like you all know, you can just walk by any church and you will see a lot of statues, whether it's statues of Jesus or whether it's just an erected statue of a cross, and they'll be made of wood and stone. I can assure you, our forefathers, when they left Egypt, when they were being given these commandments, they did not worship a cross. They did not have a statue of any of their gods, because that was the first commandment they were told. They were told to only worship the Most High, and they were told not to make images. So the Most High was telling us, if you don't keep my commandments, you'll be scattered to all the parts of the world, and you'll be worshiping idols of wood and stone. This is what was happening. Okay, next image here. Verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against you from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies, a nation whose tongue you shall not understand. 63. And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you, to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice. Let me go here and mute that. Okay, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked off. You shall be plucked from off the land where you go to possess it. Remember, they were leaving Egypt after the Exodus, and they were going to the promised land. If you've read Genesis chapter 13, verse 1, you will find out that the promised land is south of Egypt. It's in Africa. So the Most High is telling them, once you get to that promised land, if you don't keep my commandments, a nation from far away, in this case, America, will come and pluck you off from that promised land. You can see the image here. This is West Africa, all going into like Central Africa. They even went around South Africa and came to East Africa, Portuguese especially, and they plucked us out of there. They plucked us out of Madagascar, and they brought us to slavery as far as North America, South America, and so on. This is exactly what is mentioned in verse 63. In America, we'll get through these places that most of the slaves were sent to. They include the Gulf Coast, the Carolinas, Charleston, Georgia, Chesapeake, New England, places like that. we'll get to discuss that more during the discussion session. Let me carry on here. Verse 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Remember, they had just come from Egypt. So the Most High is using Egypt to tell them that they'll be brought back to slavery or bondage. It's not the same territory of Egypt he's referring to. He's referring to the bondage. Again, with ships. Ships. Okay. By the way thereof I spake unto thee, you shall see it no more again, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies in the foreign lands, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, no man shall redeem you. Your kin will not come and redeem you out of slavery. That's what this is saying. So the ships of the trade, slave ships were draped with flags of their countries and with the banners of the merchant companies that held monopolies to trade in human capital. It was common for at least 30 slave ships to sit at anchor on the same part of the coast of Western Africa, awaiting human cargo to be transported from shore and stowed in the hull. After several stops along the coast, ships with the hulls packed to capacity were ready to set sail across the Atlantic. Here's an image of what these ships look like. We're going to zoom in here. I'm going to prepare you and let you know that these images might cause some emotional reactions from you, but they're not graphic or gross, but they might stir some emotions. So I'll start with the top image of that ship at the top there. So here I'm zooming in, and it shows the plan of the lower deck with stowage of 292 slaves. You can see how they're arranged. Okay. This is how they're going to make their way across the Atlantic. This is how they made their way across the Atlantic. These are boys or young children. You have women and you have men. Okay. Ships mentioned in verse 68. Let's look at the second image. Plan showing the stowage of 130 additional slaves round the wings or sides of the lower deck by means of platforms or shelves. So there was 292 there. And on this ship, which was called the Brooks, it was a British ship, they were licensed to carry up to 454 slaves. In this particular one, they had 292 and an additional 130. So they were carrying 422 people. This is not just a depiction. No, this is an actual slave record of a ship that is in the museum. So that is what our ancestors went through. If anybody is to make a claim that they're the Israelites, the sons and daughters of Jacob, they need to present evidence that they went through these curses. It is not a badge of honor, neither should it be something that somebody steals our identity of. Let's talk about this ship some more. Your sons and your daughters shall be given unto another people, and your eyes shall look and fail with the longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in your hand. So your children will be taken away, but you'll have no ability to fight and keep them. Between 1619 and 1814, the country of the Netherlands, also called Holland today, transported over 555,000 blacks or Africans into the Americas. Okay? Our forefathers had sons and daughters, but they did not get to enjoy them, for they were taken into captivity, into the Americas, North America, South America. France shipped at least 1.4 million of our ancestors from Africa into the Americas. Great Britain, 3.3 million from Africa to the Americas. Portugal, I apologize, this image is not so good, but if you look keenly, you'll be able to see 5.8 million. 5.8 million of our ancestors shipped from Africa to America. Now, let me tell you something, and I'll use this here as an example on this image from Britain. Out of this 3.3 million are those that made it into America, or that 5.8 million are the ones that made it. So typically, there were many more. In fact, I'll use this image here as an example. Here we have a ship called Nouveau or New Jolly. It's from France. And around July 28th, 1787, this ship carried 533 souls, people, traveling from Africa to America. Only 316 made it. Okay, so 215 or thereabout lost their lives in the journey. So when you see these numbers here, there's a good percentage, maybe 40% or 30% that died, that lost their lives while making that journey. All right, let's get close to wrapping it up here. You shall betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. You shall build a house, and you shall not dwell therein. You shall plant a vineyard, and shall not gather the grapes thereof. Thomas Jefferson, one of the presidents of America, first presidents of America, he helped to create a new nation, America, based on individual freedom and self-government. Yet, over the course of his life, Jefferson himself owned 609 slaves. Their labor and service provided him personal liberty and wealth. Like Jefferson, 12 of the first 18 American presidents owned slaves. The Declaration did not extend life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all Americans, undermining the ideal that all men are created equal. And here we have some shackles on the right. These shackles are dated around 1850s. It says here that Jefferson understood that enslaved African Americans produced his wealth and provided him the leisure to read, write, and govern. Slavery was woven into his daily life, as were its contradictions. Most notably, Jefferson enslaved his own children. Jefferson owned their mother, Sally Hennings, and they inherited her slave status. The children inherited the slave status of their mother. This was one of America's presidents. We're almost getting done. Hang there with me. Hang there with me. Deuteronomy 68, 65. Deuteronomy 28, 65. And among these nations shall you find no ease, neither shall the sole of your foot have rest. But the Lord shall give you a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. Let's talk about America's capital city, Washington, D.C. Enslaved African Americans, leased out by their slave owners, mined sandstone from local quarries built from local quarries and built the United States Capitol. This is an image of it, or drawing, the White House, and the Smithsonian Castle. Congress, the institution that guarded the people's freedom, held sessions in a building constructed by forced labor. This is what we're talking about here. You'll have no rest. Not only were our forefathers shipped or enslaved, captured, and then transported here across the Atlantic, for those who survived, they were made to do more hard labor. They were even being leased out by their slave masters. You know, you could have been living in Georgia and you're sent up to DC to go do the construction there or anywhere else. You're being leased out because you're considered property. Americans witnessed the daily march of shackled slaves sold south in the capital city. So what is this capital we're talking about? So here I have an image of myself and what we call the United States Congress, Capitol Hill. So this is the background of the building, and this on the right is the foreground. Some of you might remember some events a few years ago on January 6th on this side of the building. And not far away from this building is the White House. I'm showing these two buildings, the Capitol and the White House, because those are the ones that were mentioned as having been constructed by African-American slaves. Same thing here. Among these nations, you shall find no ease. Those are the same buildings that are revered today and held in high esteem that were built on the backs of our ancestors, because our ancestors disobeyed the Most High's commands. Last but not least, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again by ships, by the way thereof I spake unto thee. You shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you or redeem you. This is the domestic slave trade. Not only did these people arrive in America, but they were being traded internally as slaves. So here you have an auction block. Elder Ray and Sister Vanessa were talking to us about Charleston when they went there, and they were being explained by the guy who runs the Galagichi tours about these auction blocks. They would stand as these ones are standing on the auction block, and then they would be auctioned as slaves. So you could be parted from your parents or from your spouse just because somebody wanted to buy you as a slave, right? On January 1st, 1808, the new federal policy prohibited the importation of enslaved people into the United States, 1808. This opened up a massive internal slave trade between 1820 and 1860. As cotton cultivation expanded westward, roughly 1 million people were taken away from their families to vast plantations along the Mississippi River Valley. Enslaved blacks were also bequeathed to relatives or moved as planters looked for new land. This immensely profitable trade in humans and forced migration had financial, political, and demographic repercussions still felt today. That's it for today. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful.